Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Homeschool Minnesota. My name is Dayle Annand. I hope you all are doing very, very well. Today, a lot of people, when I go out and speak, one of the things that I get the most questions on, and I get a lot of emails, a lot of text messages, is on the whole vouchers, ESA school choice thing. And so today I have with us our lawyer from HSLDA for Minnesota, Amy Buchmeyer. Hi, Amy.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad that you're here. So Amy's going to straighten us all out, you guys. she's
Oh dear.
she's going to give us everything we need to know in 30 minutes or less. No, I'm just kidding. But
Yes.
she's going to give us the information that applies to us, give us a good overview of what's happening across the country, how we as homeschoolers, how should we approach this topic?
Mm,
What does it mean for us and our families? And just a way of thinking about it that is more biblical, and I think we all agree that parental rights are key here. Parental
mhm.
right to homeschool our children, to educate the way we see fit, is really, really at the basis of all of this. So we're going to have Amy just talk a little bit about, I guess my first question is, Amy, it always makes me nervous when the government promises something that we already have.
Yeah.
Like, we already have school choice. Now,
Yes.
not every choice is available to every family because not everybody can afford like a really good private education or a really
Mhm.
good, I mean, I get that. I do. But it's there nonetheless. So when they shape it as school choice, that makes me a little bit like, oh, red flag. What is it that they're actually saying? So can you talk to us a little bit about that?
I think that's an excellent place to start because there's a difference between school choice, which is the very common phrase, and school choice funding, which
Yes.
is usually actually what is more at the heart of what we're talking about. So, school
Mhm.
choice, like you said, is your ability to choose the school your child attends. And that
Yeah.
you have in every state. It's guaranteed in the Constitution. We've had Supreme Court cases on this saying you can't force all students to go to public school. You have to allow other options. And that's where we get private schools and homeschools, and now pod schools and all kinds of micro schools, all of
Yeah.
those options arising. But school choice funding is what they're saying. Not only does the state have to provide these public schools where students should get free and appropriate education, but you also should be funding these other options, these private schools, these homeschools, and make it possible for students to have access to these options. And school choice funding is where we tend to get the most complications in at what point is the state now taking charge of your child's education
Right.
just under a different name?
I think the thing that I worry about the most is, when you get like a certain states that do like $5,000 per child.
Yes.
That's just ridiculous. That's so much money. I
Yes.
don't think I spent $5,000 in 2 or 3 no, I know I didn't. I know I didn't. In years of homeschooling, I just didn't do it. But I think about like, I think that families think that that money then can go towards, well, then mom doesn't have to work because that money's coming into our
Mhm.
family. But that's not really what's happening, right, Amy?
Correct. It's usually very specific what you can spend the money on. So the
Yeah.
logic goes something like public schools get $10,000 a kid. It's probably more, but just to put a number there. So it's the least we can do to give homeschoolers half of that.
Mhm.
And so then we're saying, let's say $5,000 a kid is what you're saying. But
Mhm.
that what that doesn't do is say, isn't money you can use towards groceries or towards mom not working or towards rent. That's money that can only be spent on the child's education in very narrow categories. So
Mhm.
textbooks, for example, or perhaps, depending on what state you're in, extracurriculars. It could be that you can use it to, I mean, pay for ballet lessons, for example,
Mhm.
or violin lessons. But the actual money has to go towards that education. So what you're doing is you're pouring this influx of money into these systems, saying it only fits in these very narrow categories that don't cost that much typically. A lot of homeschool families are not spending that much money. I think there was a study that said like $1,200 per student is kind of like the average for high schoolers, maybe up to 1,600. But it's like that's
Mhm.
a sizable chunk of money,
Yeah.
but that's not $5,000 now you're promising. And so what ends up happening is you're flooding this market with money, and so the cost of everything goes up, and you're not really making it more affordable, and you're not
Mhm.
actually answering what makes homeschooling so expensive, which is one parent income traditionally, or some of those other social factors that come into play when you
Mhm.
have one parent who's working traditionally and one parent that is staying home with the kids. Or if you are a single parent trying to homeschool, like there are
Mhm.
lots of challenges that face families, and
Yeah.
saying, we're going to give you more money to buy textbooks usually isn't the solution that's actually answering any of those challenges.
Yeah, that's not at all what they need. They need money for rent or for groceries or
Yes.
for, fixing the car or whatever it is that they need. When I think about money flooding the market and being used towards textbooks, I think about how that generally causes then the cost for everybody, those who aren't
Yes.
even receiving money, that goes up. So if we've noticed a major increase in our curriculum, like our math, our
Mhm.
history, language arts curriculum, because now companies can charge that much because there's enough
Yes.
states that are doing funding for homeschoolers and enough homeschoolers taking it where now they can go, well, they've got to spend that money on something.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Very much so. We've seen this. I think where it's coming out the most clearly are in things like even private services, like a
Yeah.
violin teacher, for example.
Mhm.
Maybe before it was $20 an hour, but now you've got $500 you can spend on violin lessons they can raise their
Yeah.
rates. And if the money isn't spent, in some cases it does roll over to the next year, in some cases it doesn't. But there's still that sense of you don't want to leave money on the table. So you're going to
Right.
take advantage of it. And then that's just going to make it a lot harder if you're not taking the money from the state.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
this self-fulfilling kind of problem.
Can you tell us about some states that, have implemented, like, I think Florida, Arizona,
Yes.
I'm trying to remember all
West
of them.
Virginia.
West Virginia, well, which West Virginia is a mess right now anyway.
Yes.
We can get
That
into
is
that in a
crazy.
minute, but can you talk about what has, because we just had, like, I see this on Facebook a lot or on
Mhm.
social media where, well, we moved from Minnesota to Florida and now we have, they give us this much money and, oh my goodness, it's so great, and what exactly do you see happening in those states?
Yes. So, in most states that have the traditionally education savings accounts, some states call them kind of quote unquote tax credits, but they function exactly like an education savings account. And we can get
Mhm.
into some of those definitions later. Like Oklahoma, for example, is a tax credit that's really an ESA. Most of those states, if you take that money, you are actually identified something other than homeschooling. We're very intentional when that legislation was coming out, and it was clear that they were determined to give homeschoolers money to say, and create a separate category so that those who are private homeschooling aren't going to kind of get swept up in these regulations.
Right.
That doesn't fix the economic problem, as you mentioned, but like West Virginia is a clear case of you either a homeschool student or you are a Hope Scholarship student.
Okay.
There are some exceptions. Arkansas, for example, you're homeschooled, you get the money. It kind of there's no differentiation between the two categories.
Mhm.
So you are seeing this. Well, you're seeing a very bureaucratic system emerging because
Yeah.
it's how do you give them the money? How do you what hoops do you jump through? Kind of no surprises there.
Mm.
You seeing this money flooding, like talked about prices and of things, cost of things rising.
Mhm.
But what's interesting is you're also seeing a lot of outcry about the people who take advantage of these funds, tending to be middle class or higher who traditionally could afford these things because they're the ones who can afford to have mom not work to take advantage of the state funding that's paying for this. You're
Right.
seeing the cost of providing going up, but you're also seeing a lot of states grappling with what homeschoolers are spending this money on. So in Arkansas, for example, it was either the year or two after homeschoolers were eligible to get the ESA funds, they actually passed another law limiting what the funds could be spent on
Mhm.
because homeschoolers were, for the most part, spending it all on extracurriculars.
Mhm.
And they said, oh, this is supposed to be for the student section so that 80% of it, I might be dramatizing, it might have been more like 60% of it,
Right.
is being spent. So they passed this law saying only, I believe it's 20%, but I can double check that. Only 20% of your money you receive in this ESA money can actually
Mhm.
be spent on extracurriculars. The rest has to go towards books and
Mhm.
traditional education things. You see homeschoolers responding kind of with like, oh, if I got money, I'm going to go take advantage of ballet. Or I'm going to take advantage of
Oh,
violin lessons,
yeah.
or sports, whatever the case might be. That I
Horseback
could
riding, why wouldn't you?
exactly.
Yeah.
And so that it tends to be where a lot of this ESA money
Mhm.
starts flowing because, as we talked about, actual cost of curriculum in and of itself, there's a cap at that. It's not
Mhm.
traditionally super expensive the way tuition is at a
Right.
private school
Right.
or the way all the administrative overhead is at a public school.
Mhm.
We're just talking very different types of money. So instead of celebrating that homeschooling is actually more fiscally responsible and a smarter way to spend money, we're trying to
Mhm.
pour more money into it because we're saying it's the government's responsibility to make sure these kids can have this other kind of education.
Yeah. Why does the government why are they so fixated on giving homeschoolers money? What is the end game here?
Yes. So I think there's a couple different streams coming in here. And I think you can look back at the pandemic, and the pandemic kind of devastated public schools, very
Mhm.
popular, and most private schools too, to be honest. Like
Right.
when the pressure came on the system, the only group that emerged were the homeschoolers.
Mhm.
And so it's like, oh, here's something that's working. And a lot of families start saying, I would love to homeschool, but I can't afford to, or this doesn't work, or maybe I need more resources.
Mhm.
And so you have a system that worked, the government going, we need to do something about educational changes, a general unrest with public schools across the society. And so over here, this Milton Friedman's idea of education savings accounts, vouchers, those kind of things,
Mhm.
suddenly come into the forefront as this excellent option for educating and we can fund this and make it better, and we can take advantage of what the homeschoolers have built.
Right.
The thing they're missing, though, is that homeschoolers built this, because it's parents taking charge, providing that individualized education, forming these associations, and taking responsibility for the child's education. So instead, it's happening is the state saying, hey, we can take responsibility for that and have the same product and same outcome. And that's just not how this works.
Yeah.
But I
Okay.
should probably also say caveat that by
Yeah.
saying I do think the majority of these come from a good place. I think philosophically,
Oh,
I oppose them, but I don't think they're sitting there like, how can we get them back in public school? I'm gonna,
exactly.
like, I don't think that's the end game here.
No,
I
I
mean,
think
again,
I
the end
think it
result, but not the end game.
yeah, I think it's genuinely a place of like, well, can't we give these people back some of their money
Yes.
that they're already
Yes.
paying into the system? I know in
Yep.
Minnesota, I it's roughly $13,000 per student that goes
Yes.
to the public school. But what we don't realize is that I'm not paying that. I mean, most people I know
Yes.
don't pay $13,000 in property taxes. That money is
Yes.
coming from the federal government as well. It's coming from a lot of different places for my student to be
Yes.
schooled in the public school. So when I say register in Minnesota, we have to register as a homeschooler with our school district every October by October 1st of every school year for anybody ages 7 to 17. We
Mhm.
have to register our kids as homeschoolers, and it's just a simple one-page form, no big deal. It's nothing crazy. It doesn't, well, for right now, let's hope it stays that way.
Yes.
Anyway, so that's really what it is. But um, the school district does get some of that money because I'm registered with the school district, correct? Like they still are getting some money for my child in
That's a good question.
theory.
It depends a little bit. For example,
Okay.
if you want to participate through shared time, then there's clearly a funding source available
Yes.
because you are in a class. And so there are different percentages, that come into
Yeah.
play of
Right.
what the
I mean, they're
district
not
gets.
getting the full 13,000 for my
Exactly,
child
no.
at all. Um, but here's the deal. If you're getting 5,000 per child,
Mhm.
and I have 3 kids, that's $15,000 a year. I'm not paying that. I'm probably
Yeah.
not even paying $5,000 in property
Yes.
taxes for the most
Yes.
across our state. So that money is coming from somewhere else. Where is
Yes.
that money coming from? And we also have to think that our property taxes also go to road construction, emergency
Yep.
services, libraries, clinics. I mean, things that, police departments, public safety, things that we benefit from on a daily
Yes.
basis that we need to have as a society to function. Government, our property taxes pay for all of that as well. So very
Yes.
small portion of our property taxes is actually going to education. Um,
Yes.
right? So what is it about ESAs that they want to where are they getting this money that they just want to throw at us?
Yes. So most of it right now does come from they create a budget. Maybe there's a surplus in the state and they're like, well, we can use this
Well,
to
that's
fund
not
this
the case
program.
in Minnesota.
And that's probably the danger is that
Yeah.
the sense of, hey, we've got money. If we can spend it on public schools, we can spend it on the homeschools. And I think your point about some of that money coming from the federal government is really crucial
Mhm.
because that is the federal government doesn't have any authority over education in and of itself. It's not
No.
in the Constitution. They can't mandate teacher requirements. But what they can do is they can fund it. And once they start funding it, they'll say, well, if you want this money from us, but the federal government, Minnesota, you need to put this thing in place. You need
Right.
to put teacher qualifications in place. You need to X, Y, Z. And
Mhm.
that's just at the federal level. We're not even talking about then some of the state money coming in and saying, hey,
Yep.
if you want to take our state money, X, Y, Z. But that trickle down effect has real impacts for homeschoolers. And so it's not just, I'm going to take part in this system until I think the requirements are too hard. What you're actually seeing is this shift of, let me take in that federal and that state money and start mixing it and start mixing all the other people's taxpayer dollars and accept that as part of what it costs for me to homeschool and
Right.
saying that's just, well, it's my tax dollars,
Yeah.
a tiny percent of it perhaps.
Yeah.
But the reality is when you open yourself up like that, you're
Mhm.
shifting not just the sort of financial burden, but the jurisdiction of who's responsible for that education and what has to go into it to complete it and to make it possible.
Right. And I always think that when you're taking money from the government, what you're really doing is you're allowing strings to be attached to you
Yes.
and your family. So can you talk a little bit about that? Like maybe you have a homeschool friendly government in your state right now. But we
Yes.
know that that doesn't always the case. I mean, governments change, things shift. What you're doing is you're giving them strings that they can later pull when you're connected to that money, and that money is so important to your family and so important to your
Yes.
at kids' education. Now the temptation is to kind of go, "Well, I mean, it's my child's education. I'll do anything for my child."
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So I like to say when looking at one of these bills, you should be asking yourself, whose money, at what cost, and who decides that cost?
Yeah.
And so we kind of covered the whose money is it. The at what cost is that right now kind of question of, am I going to have to do testing? Well, if it's Minnesota, I already have to do testing. So what does that
Yeah.
actually mean? Or like Arkansas, are there limitations on what the money can be spent on? Or is there something new that I'm signing and agreeing to? But the at what, so that's at what cost. And right now, especially if you have a state that's enacting these school choice funding provisions, they tend to be very pro homeschooling. They might even put in the statute something like this is not intended to regulate homeschoolers.
Mhm.
I've seen them try and do that. But the intent behind it is not very helpful because the reality is
Yeah.
more so that who decides that cost. Almost every program says something like the Department of Education will carry this out, or the Department of Revenue will rulemaker on this. And it's that agency who's not elected, who gets to make a lot of these decisions, who ends up actually bringing most of the regulations and the requirements on homeschoolers.
Yeah.
Kind of best case scenario, even if they are pro homeschooling, they're the ones who are figuring out what systems to put in place so that you can double check that what you're spending is actually accurate and how to get the money back if it's wrong. But more fundamentally, we're saying, we as the legislature have this great idea. Let's give some homeschoolers money and contribute. We're going to put this other bureaucratic organization that is not accountable directly to voters
Mhm.
and let them run it. And that is, I think, where you see the biggest danger. And that's also just, I mean, to be realistic, where you see almost any other area of our society that is hyper regulated. It's because the legislature puts this big framework in place and then hands it off to someone else to actually do the details. And it's a lot harder to hold people accountable, and it's a lot harder to honestly just navigate that morass. I
Yeah.
mean, just think about the DMV, for example. We all want licensed drivers. That's great. But it's when you put in departments that you guys run this, who do you hold accountable if you have
Mhm.
an error at the DMV? You can go find your legislator. He might help some, or she might help some, but
It's not
the
her
actual
thing.
logistics is
Yeah.
it's tenable. So that's kind of also part of the problem here is it's what qualifications are put in now, what could be in the future, because all of that can be changed by statute and legislation. And the reality of also, though, who behind the scenes is actually making those decisions and regulating and then looking into your homeschooling, deciding, well, is she actually using enough textbooks? Is that actually a textbook?
Mhm.
The problem is to have accountability, you have to have some form of definition and some form of standardization so that you can
Mhm.
actually hold people accountable. And homeschooling is like the opposite of that. Like we get out of the public schools because we don't want to see our children as just a number. We don't want to see them as a whole group mashed together and formed to do standardized testing to reach certain
Yeah.
goals. And then when we take that government money, though, we're saying, I'm going to go back under that standardization and that definition for money. And you
Mhm.
lose out then on all the opportunities of saying, no, I'm taking complete control. I'm identifying my child as an individual, and I'm going to design this curriculum around this child's needs and interests.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that isn't costly because we know it is
Oh, it
costly, and
is.
not just on a financial sense. I mean, the emotional burden, the pressure of homeschooling is immense, but that doesn't mean it's not worth it. And that doesn't
Mhm.
mean that just because it's hard, we need to sort of wash it away or try and have the government step in to make it easier on us. Because I think, as anyone, like I said, who's dealt with an agency knows, it usually doesn't actually make it easier in the long run.
Yeah.
And it's ceding that jurisdiction over your child's
Yeah.
best interest.
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to think about what are you gonna sacrifice? Are you gonna sacrifice, um, maybe family vacations, big fancy family
Yes.
vacations? Are you gonna sacrifice eating out? Are you gonna sacrifice having that brand new car or you know what I mean, those that kind of lifestyle? Or are you gonna sacrifice so that you can stay home and homeschool your kids and you're just going to tighten down that budget and you're just going to really like go this is a priority to us and for us to do it the way that we're supposed to be doing it the way God intended for us to homeschool and educate our kids,
Yeah.
or are we going to be like, well, I really just want the money. I don't want to have to think about it. I don't have to worry about it. So now we're sacrificing maybe picking that really good, like I can guarantee you that on the list of government approved science curriculums, you're not going to find apology of science.
Yeah.
You're not. You're not gonna find that really great history curriculum that you love or that really great language arts curriculum or anything that has to anything to do with godly and if you know, and then you're like, "Well, I can just bring it in myself and just not pay
Yep.
for it," you know? But it's just like it's like the nice thing about Christian homeschooling is you can bring God into everything and just solidly disciple your kids and put their feet firmly planted on a foundation of biblical truth, which you can't do with any other kind of education. You just
Yeah.
can't. Some Christian schools, probably, yes, you probably could. But then that's another sacrifice. Well, I guess I'm gonna
Yes.
sacrifice I'm gonna have to work. We're gonna have to really still tighten the belt because even though I'm working doesn't mean that we can just go and do all the things we need to do. That money has to go to tuition. So you
Mhm.
have to think about what are you willing to sacrifice? I guess my question for you is, Amy, so what do we do? Is there something that HSLDA that you guys are like, you know what, we see this working really well for homeschoolers?
Mm.
Because, I mean, it is a sacrifice financially.
Yes.
It really is. So, what are some ways that families can not take that money?
Yes. There are a couple different ways of looking like this. Obviously, it's easy for me to say, but private
Yeah.
charity is such a better way to do it. If you have a church that can have a curriculum library, for example, that's what my
Hmm.
church did growing up, and that's how my family afforded
Resource
textbooks.
centers. Where
Exact
they're
resource
popping up
centers.
all over our state.
Find them, take advantage, they're amazing. And
Donate to
also,
them.
yes, if you have the resources, please continue pouring into those. We have at HSLDA our compassion charity. So
Yeah.
if you are a single parent homeschooling, or if you're going through a crisis or something, you can apply for a grant and get help with either buying textbooks or with services like special needs services, those kind of
Hmm.
things. That's sort of just the best case because that is you're able to work with one another.
Right.
That's why I'm very curious to see how these scholarship granting organizations begin to emerge to see if they walk that line. So, for those not familiar, the big, beautiful bill this summer passed this federal tax credit for these scholarship granting organizations. And effectively, what it is that if you create this nonprofit scholarship granting for curriculum, whatever, and you donate towards that nonprofit, you get a federal tax credit for donating. But the money is donor money. And so I'm very curious what that ends up looking like. Again, it could end up being just as regulated because we're still talking someone else's money. But
Right. Right.
I can see the government there trying to experiment with, okay, education savings accounts, a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of paperwork, tax credits, sometimes a better option, but
Mhm.
often not a huge amount of money. And they want to be able to show we're granting this large amounts of money. So maybe scholarship granting organizations will end up being a nice alternative. I don't know. I'm, again, kind of watching that.
Yeah.
Um, I do like non-refundable tax credits where you're keeping your own money, especially when it's cleanly done. So Minnesota has
Mhm.
a tax credit, and it works until you're audited. Is sort of my tongue-in-cheek way of saying
Yeah,
it.
it's true.
Because suddenly you have to find the receipts and the payment stubs and all these details about your
Mhm.
education, and the Department of Revenue is digging through, your books and determining.
Mm.
So we have a model bill we put together that is a lot like the child tax credit, where they're just asking, do you have a child? Is your child in public school? If the answer is no, you get that tax credit.
Mhm.
And so what I like about that is it's very clean and you're not being kind of nickel and dimed of, well,
Yeah.
does this count? Does that not count? It's just you can
Well,
use the
and
money
then
for whatever.
yeah, and then that money can be used for groceries, rent,
Yes, exactly.
mortgage, new car, whatever it is that you need for your family, and that gives you a little more income to to your home
Yes,
that might allow one of the parents to stay home and homeschool those kids.
exactly. And it's your
Yeah,
money that you're
it's
keeping and not.
yours. There's no
So
strings.
yes,
Yes.
exactly. Like a variation of this would be a tax deduction, which is removed from your overall tax burden.
Mhm.
Tax credit is you have money paid in taxes. So but something in those systems helps
Yes.
address some of that concern of I'm paying taxes and getting nothing for it.
Yep.
Is kind of the bottom line of it.
Yeah. And for those who are wondering, in Minnesota, Homeschool Minnesota MÂCHÉ is behind the tax credit thing, like for off the top. Just if you do you have children? Are they educated in the public schools? If not, then this is how much money you get per child. We're for that. We would love to see that.
What's nice about that too is that it doesn't single out homeschooling
No, it can be.
or private schools. It just
Yeah.
says clear divide. If you're in public school, taking advantage, so to speak, of your
Yep.
tax dollars, excellent.
Yep.
If you're not, great.
Yep.
Let's help you navigate that.
Absolutely. Have you seen, Amy, families that have taken advantage of the tax money or the ESAs or school choice funds or whatever it is, and then after a few years, because here's the deal, we've seen what fraud can do. We've
Yes.
seen fraud in the government, right? So we constantly go accountability, accountability, accountability.
Mhm.
We want them accountable for however they're spending the money. And 100% we can't say that like we want accountability, except for when you give the money to me, then I should just be able to use it
Yes.
however I want, right? There needs to be accountability, and so they get to say. But have you ever seen a family or known of a situation where a family takes the money and it's working and then it starts to become like so regulated that they're like, I don't want to do this anymore? How easy is it to disentangle yourself from all of that?
I think we're just beginning to see the start of that.
Yeah.
And partially it's because a lot of these, like I
It's
said,
so
came
new.
out COVID. It's very new programs. Homeschoolers may be only qualified year 2 or year 3.
Yeah.
They set tiers to get started. So I think we're going to see more of that in coming years. What I perceive though is that there is, by the nature of it, things you cannot afford if you're not taking
Yeah.
someone else's money, thousands of dollars, extra.
Yeah.
And that does wean off and limit your options and like things you can afford.
Mm.
And that initially is something of a shock when you're used to being able to just buy whatever expensive curriculum you're looking for. I'll be curious how that continues to grow and how many families actually find when they've hit that point of what they would have 2 years ago, 5 years ago said, that's where I'd be off. How many actually decide this much is too much?
Yeah.
And I think it also is a bit of a philosophical shift as well, because you have to embrace some of the philosophical of I need to take ownership for this when
Mhm.
finding that this much is too much.
Yeah.
Because there is a little bit of that very strongly mixed in. It's both that's too much paperwork to fill out or that's too much detail to give the government.
Mhm.
It's also, why am I giving the government this much detail about my education and my child? And I think that actually is part of a broader as problem as a society, is that even though over the last 40 plus years, homeschooling has grown and the concept of taking charge of your child's education has continued to expand, we are still very much a society that views education as the domain of the government.
Yeah.
And because of that, it's like the most regulated part of parental rights.
It
Like out of
is.
all your decision making as a parent, we just sort of auto check that the government should have some say in my child's education and that needs to meet certain standardization and certain regulations, and that's just a given. And it puts us in this really weird position then when we say, no, I'm taking back. This is not me reinventing a new right. This is me actually going back to my rights as a parent to educate my child and to grow them and into the adult that God's called them to be.
Yeah.
And so that I think is also why this can be a little bit of a challenge, is because we're saying it's more than just about money. Like it's not just about the
Yes.
tax dollars. It's about who has charge of your child's education and what that responsibility looks like for you as a parent.
That's so good. That's so good. We have to remind ourselves that for centuries, millennia, homeschooling was the norm, and
Yes.
sending your children to school was unusual and kind of not normal. But that homeschooling was the norm, and many of our founding fathers were homeschooled, and many
Yes.
of our founding fathers homeschooled their kids, and for centuries. And so when we think about it that way, we look at what is happening actually in education across the country, not just in our state, but across the country, where reading levels are way down and math levels are way down. And it's not just a post-COVID thing, because we're 6 years past the
Yes.
whole COVID thing. Now it's just a matter of what is really going on here. Um,
And it's
and
not just academics. We're seeing that in
yeah,
in mental health, in student
yes,
crisis, in all these less tangible, but emotionally development of these children.
anxiety.
Something is, yes, the
Yeah,
anxiety is through the roof. So something has gone wrong here. And I think fixing that does come back to the parent and saying, all right,
the
let's
home.
start square one. How can we bring some healing
Bringing
here?
your family together and bring them home and creating a space where they can just thrive, and,
Yes.
is just something that's what homeschooling is all about. Um, any last words you wanna say to us, Amy, about this topic that you just really wanna encourage us with?
I think this can be a very divisive topic. So I'll hear from people who are saying
Yeah,
my co-op is not refusing to is refusing to take anyone who has ESA money, and all people who take ESA money calling in and being like, I'm the same person.
yeah,
So I think there are lots of good reasons that a co-op or a group might say, you know what, we're not crossing that line. We're not going to accept any of those towards dues or whatever. But I would say the more you can do it in love and not in sort of a
yeah,
angry or a reactionary way, but just hold your boundary. I don't want to say that, but do it in a way that shows you care about people taking the money, because we do. We don't think you're less of a parent for taking the money. We're just
no,
saying there are concerns there.
yeah,
And so have the debates, weigh it, discuss it, balance it, hear out both sides. But at the end of the day,
yeah,
show love in doing so, because that is going
absolutely,
to help build more bridges than just saying you're less of
yeah.
certain thing, less
We
of a
don't need
homeschooler.
any more us and them in our country. We
Exactly.
just don't need any more us and them. I mean, it's
Yes.
just I'm so sick of it. I really
Yes.
am. It's just annoying. Well, Amy, thank you so much. As usual, you give us all the answers that we need, and we're so thankful. We just pray for you guys at Homeschool Legal Defense Association. For my listeners, all links to everything HSLDA will be in the description of this podcast. I strongly urge you. I say this every time I go out and speak, but I don't know how in this day and age. There was a time when having a membership to HSLDA was something, oh, that's nice. You can do that. Now I don't know how you do it without that. we're not in the 1990s anymore. We are far past that. And having an organization like HSLDA in your back pocket is very, very, very important. And getting a membership to them. If you have a membership to Homeschool Minnesota MÂCHÉ, you actually get a discount
Mhm.
on the membership for HSLDA, and I will put all that in the description of this podcast, but super important, you guys. I would just consider it part of your curriculum fees. You have to have, the membership to HSLDA. I think it's just how things get done, and these are the people who come alongside our states and really make sure that our when we have a problem in the legislature, they're there. Like, they will fly. I just was reading about how is it Will Estrada flew from,
Mhm.
like, to Hawaii, like, hours. He had hours to get on a
3 hours.
plane. Yeah,
He
3
got a
hours.
text saying, "Flight leaves at noon. Can you be there?" And he
And
was
he
like, "To
was like,
Hawaii."
"I'm going," and he packed a little bag and headed out to Hawaii to
Yeah.
fight in their legislature, and I just think about how much we don't even see that they do behind the scenes. I know, Amy, you've been in on the, Minnesota Department of Education meetings with us, and we're
Yes.
just so thankful. Just really giving wisdom and discernment to a situation when legal things can be kind of, like, daunting, that
Mm.
you have that say, and that really helps us out. And so, Minnesota homeschoolers and American homeschoolers and international homeschoolers, we owe HSLD a big thank you. So thank you so much, Amy, for what you guys
Thank
do, and let everybody else know how grateful we are.
Appreciate that. We'll absolutely pass it on.
Thank
And
you.
truly thank you to Homeschool Minnesota MÂCHÉ, because working with you is just really, we can do this national perspective, but it's
Mhm.
the group on the ground. It's the
Yeah.
state groups who are physically in the legislature, who are talking to homeschool parents, or helping make the day-to-day homeschooling work that is so crucial. So
Yeah.
I would just like ditto back. Like, if you have not joined your state organization, please do that. Like, kind
Yeah.
of drop everything. That is how you support keeping homeschooling free, but also making it possible just in a practical sense for so many
Mhm.
families.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So, to my listeners, thank you so much for listening. Obviously, we're probably going to have way more conversations on this. This is just the beginning and the tip of the iceberg because it's becoming a big deal in our country. But if you have any questions, you can always contact us. The information is in the description of this podcast. Thank you guys for coming, and thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye.